Hello my fellow addicts of WildRift, we are back with another patch rundown, or rather patch preview for patch 4.0c. Before we hop into it, let's talk about our question of the day. What is your most epic moment in the game so far? Let me know in the comments below. Let's start with buffs. First, we have Galio. His ultimate is receiving some buffs. The hero's entrance shield duration is increased from 3.5 seconds to 5 seconds. The damage ability power ratio goes down, however, from 100% to 70%. Interesting. But the base damage as well goes up early game from 100 to 150 and later up from 250 to 350. This makes support Galio substantially stronger. And if you think about mages in this game, don't forget AP damage is absolutely broken in this game. Giving you a longer lasting shield is quite something you like to have. Surely it will not protect you from getting probably killed by a lot of people, but it's still something, especially if you combine it with the buffed Locket enchant recently. That way you might survive some heavy burst. Who receives the most out of this is the support Galio. Next up comes Nautilus in the buff list, and it's a buff to his third ability called Riptide. The Riptide's ability power ratio goes up from 30% to 50%, and the damage against monsters goes up from 150% to 200%. Don't forget, this ability hits monsters or enemy units multiple times in a row, so it's not to be underestimated to change it in that way. What does this change specifically do? It turns Nautilus into a more flexible pick. Previously, you saw him most of the time in the support role, sometimes in the Baron lane into very good matchups, but most of the time it was just a plain support pick. With this, he has the ability to be flexed into the jungle role and maybe, just maybe, be on pace with everyone else. And then you have the certain initiator that makes sure that gets everyone killed. Next on the list is Pantheon, and his ultimate's passive armor penetration is getting a buff for the later stages of the game. The scaling goes up on level 2 from 17.5 to 20 and on level 3 from 25 to 30%. This makes him a little bit strong in the later stages of the game, but Pantheon already struggled there, so is it really going to be enough? That is a question we'll have to find out, but still he's a solo queue pop stomper if you are better than the opponents, which is very fun and always nice to have. With the buffs done, we now move over to the nerfs, and first we have Rengar, and this champion deserves a nerf. He's getting hit on two different things. The passive, the unseen predator kill champion to gain bonus damage effect, is getting lowered. The scaling is getting lowered early game to make it a little bit less oppressive, but late game it evens out to the same number. His first ability's bonus attack speed number goes down from 50% to 40%. The empowered savagery bonus on the first ability bonus also goes down in the flat percentage, but that's it. It's basically the same to the first ability, but also to the empowered ability. Those nerfs will not push Rengar out of the game, he will still be a force to be reckoned with, but it's less problematic than before. But in all honesty, I'd really like to see changes to his second ability and just making him less tanky. Because this Navori build with the infinite healing, infinite spells thing is kind of annoying and really powerful. So for the next nerfs, or maybe some other changes, maybe tackle Rengar's healing a bit. That might be a little bit better than just tackling his damage, because usually Rengar's damage will still be too much, because well, he will just run you down because he crits, but the real problem from my perspective is the sustain without going for sustain items. He just can't die. Next champion is a newly released champion, it's Zeri, and she's getting nerfed basically on every single spell apart from her second ability. Her first ability gets tackled in the base damage and scaling department. Her third ability's ratio on subsequent enemies is also getting lowered. The ultimate range on casting is lowered by quite a lot from 825 units to 640 units. And last but not least, the scaling of her ultimate's ability with bonus attack damage is also tackled and goes down from 80% of bonus attack damage to only 70%. So I'll be very honest here, this champion is very oppressing when played with a Lulu or a Yuumi. Outside of that, it felt relatively weak because while 80 carries are like that. But with Zeri, she was kind of a different carry, being able to influence the fights from afar, so it's quite interesting to see what they plan on doing. From my perspective, a change to the second ability also would have been very helpful, then we could have maintained other spells. Her second ability is rather troublesome because you can really much contest a lot of objectives without really getting there. If the enemy is clumping up, you'll literally blast them to the next season. So this is a spell that's really dangerous. The other nerfs, there are not too many, or rather two strong ones, but there are many in sequence, so we need to see how it affects the power level of Zeri, especially without an enchanter, because I fear this might have been too much without the enchanters with Zeri. The last for the nerf department is a Zoe nerf, and this is a so-called skill ceiling nerf. I'll explain this in a second, but let's first talk about the nerfs. Her second ability's bonus movement speed is getting lowered quite heavily, from 35% to 25%, and lastly from 65% to 40%, that is a lot. Not only that, also the duration of Spellthief's movement bonus speed goes down from 2.75 seconds at the highest level to 2 seconds base. So, what is a skill ceiling nerf? Movement speed is a stat that's not very intuitive. Chasing people, or rather playing with movement speed around certain situations, is something that requires a certain skill set. So the better you are, the more powerful it becomes. Damage, on the other hand, most of the time is just I just attack, and usually it works. But movement speed is a more finesse stat. With this change, it nerfs like a lot of the high elo or good Zoe players quite heavily because they were relying on the movement speed for specific trading patterns or situations that are very weird to play in, like 1 versus 3 or something like this. And this will not be possible anymore, I believe. Just due to those movement speed changes, in certain situations at least. With the nerfs done, we are now moving over to the adjustments, and here we have quite some interesting ones, especially for the very first one, which is Irelia. Her base damage is getting down from 64 to 58, but there are changes to her passive which are supposed to make up for it. Irelia's passive, Ionian Fervor's bonus attack damage, is getting changed. The attack speed per stack is going down early game from 5% to 3%, and from the later stages of the game from 20% to 70%. But here's the trade-off. The bonus damage effect is getting a major buff. In early game it's from 4 to 30, and late game it's from 70 to 100. That's quite a lot of bonus damage. But here's the deal with this. It is a buff for good Irelias, quote-unquote good. Obviously, later it's just so easy to get your full stacks because you can just spam spells into the enemy team. But in the early game, it's quite the predicament. You lose base attack damage, which means your first ability will last hit minions less likely, but if you get to that point where you get your Ionian Fervor stacked and go into a fight, you'll deal severely more damage because of the magic damage bonus you get now. So this is in fact a very interesting change which benefits the better Irelia players, but nerfs the weaker Irelia players. So quite interesting to see how this will affect Irelia in the meta and what happens after. The next change is kind of a weird one, it's about Master Yi. His third ability's Voodoo style is getting changed. The bonus attack damage goes down from 10% attack damage to 8% attack damage, but the active true damage part goes up from 22 to 30, and late game from 58 to 60, so it's barely noticeable, but early game it's a slight buff for Master Yi. The question is, what are they trying to do with this, and is it a threshold buff? Will it enable him to do something which he wasn't able before? I'm curious, but I don't know yet. I don't know how I feel about this. The next change comes to Nami, and she's getting a change to her passive and her second ability. Surging Tide's passive movement speed hit by allied spells goes up from 50 to 65 base, and obviously the scaling stays the same with 20%. But with the healing, we're receiving a change in the terms of a nerf, and I don't really understand why we are nerfing Nami's heal. The numbers on her second ability go down as the game goes on, but the scaling remains the same, so it's like a 15 nerf, and I don't really understand why. It doesn't really make sense to me, nor will it make sense to any Nami main. But the cool thing is the bonus movement speed buff, because this can actually make a difference. The 15 healing later on, less likely, but movement speed, don't forget, it's a skill ceiling buff, which allows people that are very good at moving around their champions infinitely more powerful. And that's it for today's video. If you liked the video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and see you tomorrow for more RiftGuides content. Goodbye.